to Unit 5, the Vocational Landscape, Peaks, Plateaus, and Potholes. This is the 5th unit of Promoting Competitive Employment, a training program for peer specialists. In this section, we're going to be talking about different employment programs, what they offer, what their pros are, their cons, and how to use them best. We'll be moving away from a lot of the one-on-one support that we talked about in the last few units, although we'll revisit that. But we'll be really spending a lot more time thinking about the actual programs that are out there. There are a number of programs that exist. Some of them you won't necessarily work with directly, others you may. But either way, people who have used services may make reference to some of these programs. So whether it's a program that you may work with or not, it's important that we know what each of these is. We'll go through them in this slide show, but also you'll find them outlined in your workbook. The first group of programs that we're going to think about are what I call program-specific employment supports. These are the kind of supports that are typically nested within specific programs. The first is called sheltered workshops. Luckily, there are very few of these around anymore, but these were segregated work settings where people would be sent to work in really menial kind of roles, like piecemeal, putting pieces together for 8 hours a day, often getting way below the regular rate of pay. And they would do these as sort of a pre-employment work skills development. And these would often go on for years and years, and for many people, they never sort of worked their way out of the sheltered workshops. A second area is what's called transitional employment programs. These are usually nested within clubhouse programs. It's part of the work-ordered system of clubhouses. And these are programs that the clubhouse itself negotiates to take over these jobs with an employer. And then they fill these jobs with people from the clubhouse on a transitional basis. So someone may get a transitional job, for example, doing the janitor work in a building, in an office building. And whether that person shows up or not, the clubhouse is required to have someone show up. And so there are, typically several people that may be part of that program. A sort of variation on that is when mobile work crews, also at clubhouses, go to do different jobs. Again, they're meant to be sort of a transitional kind of thing. They're based on the jobs that the clubhouse has acquired, not necessarily, and usually not at all, based on the person's choice, except for a choice to begin to develop more work skills. They're not usually paid jobs, or if they are, they're paid at a lower rate. They really are about getting out and getting the skills and learning how to do the work. There's also employment specialists through ACT and PACT programs. Those are programs in the community, programs, they're called sometimes ACT, sometimes PACT. And these are sort of a hospital without walls program. And they're based on a team model, and every team is supposed to have an employment specialist that supports the people that they're working with around their employment desires, if someone has one. ACT and PACT employment specialists haven't gotten that much support even within the model itself, and so they haven't really been that effective in helping people to achieve employment. Another area of support, of employment support programs, are just programs that are available out in the community. And there's two key ones here. One of them is called One-Stop Centers. These are run by the Department of Labor. They're not specific to people with disabilities. They're really there to help people that are unemployed. They're often a big support of people that are on unemployment insurance, who have been laid off and are looking for new jobs. One-stop centers tend to provide a lot of support around the issue of getting a job and doing things like looking at different kinds of work, maybe taking classes at the center to learn more about choosing alternative jobs if you can't find your old kind of work, things like how to interview, writing resumes, and so forth. There's a lot of resources in one-stop centers, like computers and databases and so forth. There's not as much individualized one-to-one support. And again, this is not specialized for disabilities in general, and certainly not around psychiatric disabilities. It's been an area that they've been particularly ineffective, not really knowing where to start to support people that have a psychiatric disability background. The other kind of employment support that's available in the community is public vocational rehabilitation systems. Every state has one. They're a combination federal, state funded agency. And so they're available to everybody who meets the criteria for their services. They may be called different things in different states, but they're generally the same. And their mission is, it says, vocational rehabilitation empowers individuals with disabilities to achieve employment, economic self-sufficiency, independence, and inclusion and integration into our communities. That is their main goal. It says the mission of VR generally centers on helping people with disabilities, and this, of course, is all disabilities, to become competitively employed and more self-supporting. What's important to know about Voc Rehab Centers is that while they may support people around going to school, it's only if going to school is required for them to get a specific job. They do not see themselves, and their mission is not to send people to school. Most services within the state and public VR are free, but you have to qualify. And the qualification is that they serve the most disabled. One way that you get into that category is if you receive SSI or SSDI. That automatically puts you into that category. They offer many services once you qualify. They do everything from helping you figure out where you want to go, doing testing that can help you figure out what your likes are, what you're good at, what your skills are, your aptitudes. They can help people start a business. They can help with keeping a job by providing adaptive equipment or supports you may need on the job. They can help with training to get into an entry-level position in a preferred job. They're not going to pay for your master's and doctorate unless you can't get into your field unless you have a master's. In that case, they actually would. They also include things like adaptive equipment, supplies, books, transportation. It really often depends on how well the case is presented for them, for what the goal is, how it will indeed lead to a road towards self-sufficiency. The better that can be outlined by the person using services, the much more likely that VR will agree to a plan and fund it. The wait list often is very long to get the funding once you've been approved, but that waxes and wanes depending sort of on what's going on the national and state level, including if the national and state level is seeing employment as a priority or not at any given spot. So I've mentioned some of the kind of employment services that VR itself offers, but in general, when we think of VR or other kinds of programs, the kinds of programs in general that are offered, or the kind of services that are offered, when we think about choosing are, as I said, testing around interest, aptitudes, and skills. They also often will do what's called situational assessment, which is to try out different things in an environment that's similar to the work environment. That might be testing out sort of your ability to work in a general kind of work like secretarial work, or it may be just testing out the ability to go to work every day. All of those different things can be tested out in a situational assessment. After they've done testing in VR, they can integrate all these tests together to come out with a list of the kinds of careers that you're well suited to given your interests, your aptitudes, and your skills. They also have access to a great book, which you can also access online. And so I put the link in your resources, but it's called O-Net, and it's an online database with a description of just about every job that's available. And for every job, it has a really detailed description. It outlines the skills that are needed, the aptitudes, the qualifications. Everything is listed. You can do a search in O-Net by skill. You can do a search by aptitude, by job title, by a keyword for a kind of job. All of those kind of mix and match searches are all available on O-Net. It's a great resource. In terms of sort of the getting part of employment support, programs offer help with job searching, writing resumes, practicing interviews, job development, and this is a really important one. Job development is really creating a job within a company or within a setting that's really specialized to who the person is. So it's sort of selling to a company, you know, you'd really benefit if you had someone doing this thing that you don't have right now. And wouldn't you know it, I also have the perfect person for this position. There are some people that are great job developers once they have relationships with employers and really know sort of what job markets look like. They create the greatest niches for people in different companies. So job development is a service that may be offered and that can really come in handy. As I said, most of these are again related to VR, but you can get equipment to support searching, things like computers and job databases, and then things that may be needed supports like interview clothes, as well as transportation. So there's often a lot out there in these programs in terms of supporting people around getting what they're looking for, getting the job that they're looking for. Then as we sort of think about keeping the job once you get there, some of the services that are offered are job coaches, which are people that can meet someone who's new in their job, either on the job, so sort of on-site support, or maybe, you know, in the coffee shop once a week if the person doesn't want the job coach coming right in. But those are job coach support is available. Also, either the job coach or other people within employment support services may take on a role of negotiating out things with people's supervisors or advocating for adaptive equipment on the job and so forth, and really trying to bring the employer in to be a person's support as well. And so as we think about these different kind of programs that are out there, and as I say, they're in your workbook and they're spelled out in more detail so that you can look at them along with links so that you can find out even more about them. But what's our role as we think about this, the role of peer support? Well, the first and foremost thing that we really need to do is to understand what programs are out there in our area and what each of them can offer, so that we can support the people that we're working with to also understand what they have available to them. We can also support people making decisions about utilizing the programs, which ones will best meet my needs right now. And then accessing the services, which I think is so important, that as peer supports, we don't do the old thing of giving people a phone number and saying, well, there's a place here, here's the number, but really making sure that that person is in a place where they can do the follow-through. You know, it may be that simply the first time being with them, accompanying them to the door, or, you know, accompanying them to the first interview can make such a difference. I'll often mention when I talk about this role of accompanying that I'm 31 years sober at this point, and that means that I have a really good understanding of what goes on inside 12-step meetings. I've gone to them for a really long time now, and they all run pretty much the same. And yet, amazingly, after all these years, despite my comfort inside those rooms, I still get terrified when I have to go to a new place that I've never been to before and walk into a new meeting that I've never been to before. And this is after 31 years. Now, I can walk through that and go anyway because, you know, I've had a long time to build those skills. But for people that are just beginning and for people who are making huge changes already, to just accompany can make the whole difference in the whole outcome. So accompanying is a huge role that we play. We can also help people navigate within the programs and brainstorm solutions. If you've had any experience yourself with using places like a one-stop center or a state public VR system, or even been enrolled at some point in a transitional employment program or any of those, navigating them aren't always the easiest. And the reason I think why so many of these haven't had great success is that people fall through the cracks at different points. We can be there to really support people to navigate through, and when issues come up, help them brainstorm solutions. We can support them having a voice within that program, and it may be just, you know, having a chance to do a role play with us about what I'm going to say to my VR counselor when I go back about why I'm not really liking this plan, or the one thing I want to add in, or whatever the issue may be. And supporting people in that role of really self-advocating sometimes. And again, role plays are great supports to help people do that, and accompanying them there as they go do it. Maybe be outside the room, say, you can do it, you can do it. And then when the person comes, how did it go? You know, what a difference that can make. And so here we go, accompany. And I'm sure there are many others that I haven't thought of sort of off the top of my head here today. And I would suggest that you have many more that I haven't mentioned. But all of them that just come back to this core of peer support are very, very valuable. So let's look at an example, and let's really use the vocational rehabilitation, because that's probably a program that we'll interface with more often than any other one. And let's go back to our friend Jose. So just as a reminder, we had worked with Jose earlier. He had said he wanted to think about working, but really had absolutely no idea at all about what he might want to do. So we spent some time with Jose, and we helped him explore what some of his preferences might be by looking, you know, really at what were some activities that he had done in the past. And in those activities, what did he like? What did he not like? And so we sort of did this exercise together and some other things. And it wasn't quite enough to help Jose make a final choice, but it was a great way to eliminate a lot of things for him. And in this process of thinking through these things, he really realized that he wanted to pursue something that he could grow into and sort of move up into sort of a leadership role in some way. He also realized that there were some basic themes of what he loved, like working with kids and animals, and doing something that was meaningful, that for him, meaning was more important than income. Not that he didn't want to get paid, but the income wasn't going to be the number one thing for him. It was going to be that he would have the ability to do something of value for others. So together, Jose and his peer specialist sort of brainstormed together what options were available to him. They looked into the O-Net under the skills and interests to get a better idea of what jobs even were out there, given some of these themes that Jose was coming up with. And they looked at things that were available for jobs to see if anything really spoke to him. And they looked also to see if he could get services at the local VR office. The peer specialist explained to Jose that VR usually starts with this assessment that includes interest inventories and tests that can, sort of mash it all together and come out with a list of different areas of work and careers that are a good match. And Jose ultimately decided that this was a really good direction to go. He thought that would give him some more answers because he didn't have quite enough yet to figure out where he was going, although he felt he was getting closer. So while Jose was working with VR, he ran into some brick walls. And together, the peer supporter, met with Jose all along and at this point really helped him to articulate what his needs were, what was the brick wall really all about, and offered to support him by going with him. He decided to go back on his own to VR, but now he felt like he could really explain to his counselor what it was that wasn't working for him and to see if they could come up with a plan that would be more helpful for him. And indeed, they were able to do that, and over time, Jose continued to work with his VR counselor, and eventually they came out with a working plan. The test results had shown some interesting work areas for him, but even the testing process itself led Jose to get even more information about himself. And what he realized as he sort of concluded the testing process with VR was that he really wanted to work with service dogs. That he wanted to somehow be able to use service dogs to help kids who were in trouble. He had been a kid in trouble, and he was thinking, wow, how helpful that would have been. So his peer specialist knew one thing about VR that is very true, and that is having a concrete plan tends to have a lot better result with VR than just sort of going in and saying, this is what I want, or, I want the sort of general area. Having a plan that the more detail you can sort of think through in advance, the better. And this has been shown in research that this has a much better outcome in VR. So together, the peer specialist and Jose worked together to put together a plan that really described for the VR counselor what the job is, how it can lead to self-sufficiency, what the schooling would look like, what Jose has done up to now that really sort of shows that he'd do okay in the school program, and what exactly he would need from VR to pursue this plan. He was also able to show that he couldn't get into this kind of work without this kind of schooling, and he really just sort of presented this plan to the VR counselor. And he went in and used his good self-advocacy skills that he had worked with his peer support specialist, and he ultimately was able to get the plan approved. So that's a great example of how the peer support specialist and the VR system really supported Jose in different ways and in really complementary ways to help him get to where he wanted to go. And that's what we really think about, is what resources are out there, what specialties are out there that can provide a level of employment support that we don't have and that we don't really want to have in our job as peer support. But then, even as people are working with those specialties and those specialists, how can we make sure that they're still getting the benefit out of it? So that was a great example of that. So let's talk about Sally again. Sally, if you'll remember, was the woman who wanted to be an astronaut initially, and then as she did more exploring and thought about it, she decided that she didn't really know exactly what direction she wanted to go in, but that it certainly had something to do with astronomy or stars or something in that field, but she couldn't really figure it out. So she decided in the interim she would go get a job at a planetarium at the local science museum. So she connects with the employment specialist in the IPS program to get support to get the job. The employment specialist does the assessment, and in about 3 weeks, Sally and the employment specialist begin the job search process. They try to think of jobs that can be developed that include Sally's interests in astronomy, space flight, or anything, as well as look into the planetarium. As they begin to investigate the planetarium, they learn that you actually have to have a bachelor's degree to work there, and that they don't take in volunteers because of the expense of equipment. So Sally and her her employment specialist continue thinking about, are there any sort of special niche jobs that can be created with all of her interests? And they look sort of in what's around right now in other jobs just to see if any of them spark her interest. Sally has expressed some dissatisfaction to you, and you've supported her to practice saying this to her employment specialist. Sort of gone over what she might say and how to really articulate that to her. Sally continues working with her employment specialist, and they continue to look at jobs that are available in the area and brainstorm things that she might like to do. But none of them is anywhere near what Sally wanted when she began to go work in the planetarium. Her employment specialist has been trying to get Sally to widen the possibilities for a job so they might be able to find one, but this is leaving Sally feeling very invalidated, and she expresses this to you, her peer specialists. You brainstorm options with her, including bringing up VR with her employment specialist, given that some IPS programs actually work in conjunction with VR. Another option that together you brainstorm is leaving the IPS service and utilizing VR on her own, or taking a break from the whole thing for a while, taking some time on her own to think through what other direction she might want to go, and taking more time to research more about jobs in the area that she wanted to work in. As her peer specialist, you offer her support to evaluate the pros and cons of each option, and also what she might want to say to her employment specialist. Over the next 2 weeks, Sally talks to her employment specialist, who says that although she hasn't worked with VR in the past, she's certainly willing to support Sally in that direction. And Sally's also weighed out the pros and cons of her other options. In the end, she decides that her employment specialist is committed to supporting her, and that she really would like that support, but in conjunction with VR services as well. So we see that's just another example of how we're bringing in those same peer specialist skills and supports that we often use. And again, it's sort of bracketing the other services that are out there. The last area I want to briefly just touch on before we end is education supports. And unfortunately, there aren't very many of these available, and yet it's really important for us to think about them. The reality is that education is key to career development and to sort of that trajectory if people want to go forward in vocational recovery. For some, it won't be necessary, but for a lot, it may be. And it may not even be the first step. It may be a step that comes up midway in the process. But the reality is that when and if that's a choice for people, there aren't too many supports out there for them. But let's talk about the few that are there. One is public vocational rehabilitation, also supported education, and college disability services. So first, let's talk about the public vocational rehabilitation services again. And you may remember that I said when we talked about them before that they are not, their mission is not to support people to get education. And this is true. If you go to VR and say, I'm here to go to school, they'll probably tell you, sorry, that's not our job. However, the reality is that there are many areas of work that you can't access unless you have some kind of schooling. And in that case, it falls right back into very much the mission of VR, because schooling is the way to access the job. So if we think back on our friend Jose again and just briefly review the example that we had with him, it was a school plan that he was asking for support from VR for, and it was because that was the only way he could get into that field. So VR actually is an avenue for support for school, but only if it's to lead to a place of work and self-sufficiency. This means that VR will ask the question, is this realistic? And while we don't usually like to have people ask that, in this case it's really in line with their mission, that they need to know that people can achieve an employment goal out of schooling. So the more that people can explain how it is realistic for them, the better that they'll make out with VR. Another education support is called supported education. It is the same model as supported employment, except the ultimate goal is to choose, get, and keep an education program rather than a job or a career. There's a great book in your resources by Karen Unger called Supported Employment. This book was put out quite a long time ago at this point, but it still has all the basics for supporting people around getting into school programs. And peer support, of course, just ends out to be the same thing that we always think about, which is supporting people to find out the information, to evaluate their options, to choose their best directions, to navigate the programs, and so forth. So that's really what supported education is. And then finally is the college disability services. And in the next section, we'll talk about what services people have a right to under the ADA, the American with Disabilities Act. But often college disability services, especially in larger schools or in specialized schools, offer many other educational supports beyond just the ADA requirements. So they may have programs that teach people more how to learn, how to do alternative learning. They may provide extra resources for people. They might provide people with tutoring, specialized tutoring for more challenging classes like some of the maths and the languages and so forth. So there's a whole variety of supports that may be available within the school under the umbrella of disability services. So those are always important to support people to find out about and use and access. And guess what the peer support role would be in there? You got it, the same as what it always is. So as we look back what we've covered in this section, we've looked at really a variety of different employment models that are out there, some of which are sort of fading into the past, but are still important to know about, some of which are nested within particular programs, and you may or may not run into them depending on whether you work with that kind of program, and some of which are more widely available. We also looked at some examples of using peer support skills in relation to someone's involvement with any of these employment programs that may be available to them, and also just took a brief look at some of the specific types of services that might be offered within these programs And finally, we just took a brief look at some educational support programs. Your workbook does have resources on all of these different areas for you. And I would really strongly recommend that, you begin to get more familiar with them. But as always, it's when you start to actually work with them and around them that you'll get even a greater familiarity with them. I always say that as peer supports, it's not our job to know everything about everything, but it is our ethical requirement to know enough about things so that we get the red flags at the right time to support people to get what they need. And that's certainly especially true when we think about employment support. Just that we know enough that we can say, whoa, I think that this might be a good place to pull in one of those resources or one of those programs or whatever, because they can be really helpful here. And as we go into the next unit, we'll be talking about some other supports that enhance the journey. These are two of the biggest supports that you'll run into. One of them is the Social Security benefits, and the other is the ADA. Hope I'll see you then. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.